Hi, good evening. This is Michael Reddy. This is a Family Energetics free evening. Welcome. I don't know what this is, number something or other. I'm going to talk to you tonight about family soul. Actually, I'm going to have a conversation tonight with these good people about family souls. But first, I want to remind you that what used to be called Family Constellations Core Concepts and is now called Family Energetics Core Concepts will be starting again on June 20th. That is a 9-week session, 9 sessions, 9 weeks, and it really covers everything in this book, which is a very detailed manual for understanding and performing constellations. And then also all the work that I've done in relations with energy psychology, namely EMDR and EFT and the meridian tapping. And I think that they are natural partners. And I think that with a tool set, including both of them, especially used in combined ways at times, you're really equipped to deal with either personally experienced trauma or ancestrally inherited trauma. And since many people, or at least many of the people I get, do have both, it's a real value. The whole reason I got involved in energy psychology 4 years ago was I needed some better tools for personal trauma. So it's on the website. ReadyWorks.com. It's a pay what you want course. It is worth taking again if you've taken it. Like the stuff I'm talking about tonight, it's rather deep and real. And it's not something that you just kind of breeze through. And in fact, to get around to the topic, I think that what we're going to talk about tonight is profoundly important, very poorly understood, and in many ways at the root of a lot of the troubles on the planet. I mean, you could name a lot of things that are central problems. Obviously, the relation between masculine and feminine energies is totally out of balance here. That's a biggie. The relationship between wealth and poverty is totally out of balance. Exploitation by people who make money off of conflicts is totally out of balance. But the other thing that's very close to home when we start talking about constellation work is we are on this planet, and I don't know, maybe in some sense in the universe, I don't know. And I mean by that the universe of universes, not simply this plane, but other planes. The failure to understand and balance the relationship between our individual and our collective natures is a mess. We really don't understand that in the West anyway. We don't, and we do a terrible job of trying to balance it out. Because unlike some of the species that I'll talk to you about in a second, we're not just collectives. We have huge, profound social empathy systems that bind us into collectives. I mean, we're literally like pieces of Velcro for one another in a sense. But on top of that, we have the most individuality, the most, particular individual genius, desires, all kinds of things of anything on the planet. So we're capable of a lot more, but balancing that stuff is a lot harder. So I want to ask you, what we're talking about tonight can be called the family soul and is often called the family soul. So I really do want to have a conversation because I have a lot of different points I can make, and they don't necessarily all have to be made in some order. But I mean, what do you guys think if I say, well, what's a family soul? What do you do? I mean, it's talked about a lot, or it's, the notion floats around in the constellation communities, but it's not something that necessarily gets characterized in any sort of detail. What do you guys think when I say, well, what's a family? What do you think, when I say, what's a family soul anyway? And
it's because we're all part of each other.
Say it again, please.
We're all part of each other. I'm part of my mum and my dad and my brothers and my cousins and that. And it's like an overlap, I suppose, really.
Wait, it's like what?
An overlap.
An overlap.
Does that make sense?
I'm writing it down, so it must.
So, I mean, it's not just physically that we're part of each other. It's our spirits and our souls. We're just overlapped, and we're all part of each other.
What's the soul?
The soul is the part of you that was there before you were born, I believe, and will always exist.
Okay. Those are very good comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else care to join the conversation? What do you think of when we talk about that? Linda C., I think.
I think of family conscience. There's this invisible umbrella of sorts where history, unspoken rules, invisible dynamics are all intertwined in our conscience, and we inherit it. I use that for the word conscience more than soul in my work.
Okay. Okay, more good points, and a slightly different way of talking about this. Anybody else? Please. You don't really have to stick up your hand. You can just, we're so few right now.
Hi, Linda here.
Hi, we're very high quality though. Actually, we are.
Oh, I just put in my, no, it's better put the microphone in. To me, it's a felt sense. So it's not necessarily eyes or ears, but it's felt, a sense of something. And because a person could be overseas, but there's a sense of them, that feeling that they belong in some way, that felt sense. I would think of it that way. I've just been talking with my former husband who's had a drama with his wife and health, and he said to me this morning, it's the first time we've talked for a while, that she said, "Oh, I think I'll die like my family." And my ears pricked up. I thought, "Well, you didn't pick that up a few weeks ago." But that, like my family, that a sense, some sense of, it's just some sense of, well, this is me, or I'm experiencing this, or something like that. A felt sense as opposed to a palpable material sense.
Okay. Izzy, you want to chime in? You're muted. Unmute.
Whoops. Wrong button, sorry.
Whoops.
A few things come to mind. It's like everything that's said is totally synergistic with my thoughts and views on this, and maybe also just that if in many, as like imagine having a conscience and thinking it's separate from your spleen or your heart or your neurological structure, and it's like we might all appear to be different, but somehow there's some connection that means that we all function as a whole. Or whether you look at Michael's classic ant colony example that I often use, that there's something that is going on, conscious or unconscious, that draws us or repels us in some ways. But there is connection nevertheless, as both, well, everybody said. And the realization of that, the more one can realize it, in the same way as the more one can realize a shadow, it has less hold, the more you can be conscious of what these ties and agreements and dynamics are, what we have in common, how far we can push it before we no longer feel like we're towing the right line. And I think that's often the nub of it, is when we try and go outside that paradigm, is when we meet resistance, either within ourselves or from them. That before constellations, it feels like there's almost like an invisible wall that you can't move past this, no matter how much you might consciously want to try. And I think often doing constellation enables you to permeate through that unconscious barrier, because it enables you to be aware of what those agreements were and potentially enable them to be expressed in a way that still serves that organism or that family, soul, or conscience, without rebelling out of the system.
Cool. So those are all very beautiful sets of comments.
That's nice. When you think of an organism, you think of something that has some sort of living quality to it, but you can't always define it in material sense. Like I was thinking, you'd say a family feeling or a sense of family, or this idea of an organism, something that's got uncertain boundaries, but you know they're there, and things are happening inside it. Lovely. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to enlarge on that stuff for a minute in my typical way, and then throw questions back at you again. I'm going to talk about this in terms of the nervous system. I'm going to talk about it in terms of intelligence, and intelligence in the way I'm talking about it doesn't exclude feeling. In fact, intelligence in the way I'm talking about it requires feeling. Doesn't work well without it. We look around this planet, and I'm going to do what Izzy said now, and we can. So you should see a picture now.
Yep.
So we can look at what I want to call pure group intelligences. So here's this colony of African termites, which as a whole does amazing and responsive and adaptive things. It can, all these little creatures construct things like this, and that thing is 12, 15 feet high and 30 feet wide, and cool air is sucked in through those entrance and exit tunnels that you see along the sides, and the heat generated in the center, and the center is nurseries and gardens. The heat causes the air to go up the chimneys, so there's always fresh air circulating through this thing. And water, when it rains, goes down into those little sumps that you see at the bottom. And these thousands of 30, 40,000 of these little creatures create this thing. And there's no brain. I mean, the queen doesn't have it. There's no brain. And the only way to really understand this is to say that, in the built into each individual are characteristics that make it respond almost like its own, each individual is like its own neuron. They're exchanging little chemical signals and all this kind of stuff is going on. And this is called the distributed intelligence, okay? And this starts to capture some of these things that people said, like it's an overlap, or we're part of each other, or there's in this group, it's all and only belonging. and there's no rebelling against the conscience. There's there are different types of, different castes, if you will, right? Workers and warriors and queen and all this kind of stuff, and tenders of the queen and stuff like this. But nobody departs. There's really no individuality here. But there's tremendous intelligence. Enough intelligence, in fact, that this species has evolved for, millennia. Probably thousands or millions of millennia. I don't know the exact amount, or if anybody does. And this whole group, as a whole, if it runs out of food in the area, will decide to pack up and leave and go build another one of these someplace that seems more promising. This group will fight a war if something, if another such group encroaches on its territory. How do these things happen, right? I mean, it's first of all, it's a miracle. This is a tremendously intelligent entity. Obviously, bees and ants and they're the same thing. But technically, this is called a distributed social intelligence. That is to say, the elements that create the intelligence don't exist in any one place or in any one individual. And in this one, nor are there particularly leaders and followers. Okay? If we take this and let me get into here. Oh, that went the wrong way. If we start to just scale this up through the species, this social intelligence doesn't really go away. If you look at herd animals, there's a bit more individuality. There's a few more in the way of leaders. There's, typically dominant members and less dominant members and things like this. But they are all watching and listening together, right? And they're tuned into one another. When you see white-tailed deer running through the woods and they have their flags up, which we see a lot around here, underneath the underside of their tail is pure white. And that tail's normally down. And it's very hard to see them in the woods. But when they start running away, that tail is up and waving. And that's the only way they can see each other fast enough to follow each other. Because these little guys are going fast and dodging roots and branches and rocks and God knows what all. If you look at pack hunters, wolves, hyenas, things like that, there's more individuality. There's there are only one, typically one dominant pair breeds. There's a distinct hierarchy. If you look at primates, bonobos or gorillas or chimpanzees, you've got more complicated stuff. But my point here is that this distributed group social intelligence that is basically just like the insects. It's built in. It's, as somebody said, it's unconscious, or it's a felt sense, right? And as Marie also said, it's not just material. We'll come to that in a minute. So then you come to humans, and we got huge individuality, and we've got, we now know this in terms of neurology, we have a social empathy system that is the first thing that works when we come out of the womb. And what that social empathy system is basically doing is tuning in ways that I'll talk about in a second, to the behavior when you come out of the womb, basically the behavior of your mom and or the closest caregivers. And that's running. That's already up and running. You smile at a little 2-month-old, and that 2-month-old smiles back at you. That is built in. And the way, so before we had language and thought, we had families. And families are very much like the colony in an insect community, or the herd, or the pack. I mean, that's our basic social unit. That's our survival unit. That's what keeps us going. And that existed, you know, before we had language or all sorts of thought or stuff like that. It's there. There's no reason to say that it went away in the last 2,000 years or 4,000 years. And neurologically, we are now, and more than neurologically, we now know that we've got this stuff going on that is not conscious, that constitutes not all, but way more of how we communicate with one another than typically the words we're saying to one another. All right, we are tracking body language and gestures and facial expressions and eye movements. We're, you know, I can say something to you. I can say to you, I didn't go home yesterday. No, I didn't. I'll say, I didn't walk home yesterday. And then I can say, I didn't walk home yesterday. And those have two totally different meanings. If I say, I didn't walk home yesterday, it means I walked someplace else. And if I say, I didn't walk home yesterday, it means I went home, but I got a ride. You follow me? That's very instantly different understanding.
Or I didn't walk home yesterday.
Thank you. No, that's true. I didn't walk home yesterday. Or I didn't walk home yesterday. My sister did. So you can just put that contrastive stress on a word, and you've just utterly changed. And obviously, this is stuff that gets lost in email and texts and tweets.
Yeah.
Totally.
Causes so much issues with the teenagers, I can tell you.
Yes. And we've got various forms of touch and smells. We've got energetic, you know, we've got literally electromagnetic fields that extend out 12 feet or so. These are low energy, but they're real, and they're measurable, and they tend to look, if a person is standing, it's generated mostly by your heart, because your heart and your blood is salty. It's an electrolyte, which means that it carries electricity, and anytime electrical little electrons move, they generate magnetic fields. Anytime magnetic fields interact with anything that conducts electricity, they create more electricity in whatever conducts. So there's this thing around you that looks like a torus, like a big donut. When you sit in a constellation group, or you sit, you know, just with family or friends, those things are interacting with one another. And then there's the subtler and psychic energies. And what's going on is that your body, built into your body, built into your nervous system, hardwired into your nervous system, is something which watches what other people are doing and understands what, or empathizes with what they are doing, based on sending signals to your body that let you know what it would feel like to be doing what that person is doing. I'll say it again because it's maybe a little convoluted to understand, but if I see a guy chopping wood, and the axe bounces off the piece of wood, and it hits him in the ankle and gives him a big chop in the ankle, I am often going to feel a twinge in my ankle, because what my nervous system has done is to perceive what happened out there, and the same neurons that would fire if I were doing it myself do a little dry run. They literally send the same signals down, and we don't, you know, it's like we're dreaming. We're not conscious of this, but it's like, I'm swinging the axe, it's bouncing off it's hitting my ankle. What do I feel? Yuck, right?
I think we can all feel it right now, actually.
And this is true anytime that you see something, you hear something, you read something. So if you're watching a bloody horror movie, your body is experiencing a lot. All right? If you're watching a love scene, your body is experiencing a lot. Oversimplifying is one of these bullet points here. Your right brain scans your own body to find out the meaning of what it sees others doing. So this is not conscious stuff. This is way pre-conscious. So this goes into, you know, what someone called a felt sense, or just this overlap. We're part of each other. What I'm trying to do is give you a picture of how that being part of each other works, a start at a picture. There's this field called social neurobiology, and Dan Siegel's book Mindsight is extremely good, extremely readable, and very good for anybody interested in mental health to read, emotional health to read. They've pretty much decided that you can't understand the human brain as an isolated thing. It's built to bond. It's hardwired to do this. Now, I like talking this way because it grounds me, and it's a way of talking that, you know, people outside of the mystical psychic world can understand. I think there's psychic stuff involved here too, but we've got a lot of knowledge about what the heck is going on. Now this is just, so this leads me to what I set up and think about and talk about as sort of the first characteristic of the family soul, that it's a guiding social intelligence distributed among built-in, largely subconscious behaviors of family members. And I'll say that again. It's a guiding social intelligence distributed. It doesn't exist in just one, okay? Among built-in, largely subconscious behaviors. Not totally subconscious, because sometimes we're aware of these things, quasi-aware of them. Or we can know that we feel the urge to do something, even though the urge didn't come from our consciousness. So this is what I want to call the family soul. This distributed collective intelligence. It's there. It's active. I don't care if you're at a cocktail party or in a political party or on the street. It's active all the time. You're drawn to some people immediately. You're repelled by other people immediately. In the same way that people stand in a constellation group and, you know, dad can't look at mom. The rep for dad can't look at the rep for mom. There's just some feeling there. This is going on all the time. And, you know, our whole strength as a species, we're not lone hunters, or, you know, we're not like raptors or something. Our dominance in this planet is based totally on the fact of teamwork. Totally. Yes, we have high intelligence, but even that high intelligence, you know, speaking anthropologically, was probably developed from two reasons. One, the need to manage complicated social relations, and two, hunting. Hunting requires that people, that trackers put themselves in the mind of the animal that they're tracking. I mean, this is true. There's a whole interesting book about this. I mean, the highest level, because there are times when, you know, a track is obvious, but then the animal trots off through bushes, or the you know, or leaves that doesn't leave any, or is on hard rocky ground. And at that point, you know, like a Kalahari Bushman is putting himself in the mind of the animal and saying, here I am, this guy is chasing me. What do my instincts tell me to do? And you'll notice that this is a form of empathy, and it becomes a form of psychic unity for these people. That's part of the reason that they are so respectful of the animals that they hunt. I'll stop in a second, but you know, when I was being trained by Native Americans, I read a lot of books on the history of native tribes and things like this. And over again, I read this same kind of paragraph that said, oh, these stupid primitives kneeling down and making a prayer at the side of the deer that they've just killed, that the deer gods don't come and kill their family, or something like this. These primitive idiots, you know. And I mean, the primitive idiots are the people who wrote that paragraph, because the natives are profoundly aware of what I would call ecological spirituality. They know damn well that they depend on these animals, and the balance between them and these animals is crucial. When things get out of balance, if there's too many deer and not enough people, or too many people and not enough deer, things don't work, right? And the being animists, they're deeply aware that this is spirit, not just bodies running around. But where I was, the 2 points I was making is that our high, you know, we prize our high intelligence and individuality so much since the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment had a lot of good things: liberty, equality, fraternity, you know, the rights of man. Only it should be the rights of people, the rights of people of all color. But we really got off track because our high intelligence, I could give you so many examples of this. There's monkeys. I think it's bonobo. There's a certain bunch of monkeys who have only like 5 different cries. Their whole vocabulary is 5 different noises. That's it. Okay. But they have a tremendously complex social structure. And they have to keep watching how that social structure is changing, because they have to behave in terms of it, so that fights don't happen and food gets shared and mating happens and all this stuff, right? And they're very bound together. So here they are with 5 different noises. And then you've got these cuttlefish and octopuses, which have developed these amazing skins that can change color to reflect whatever they're up against. If they're against a brown rock, their skin turns brown, and their emotions, their feelings are flashing across. If you look up cuttlefish on YouTube and look at these pictures, it's like a light show. And so they've got a tremendous bandwidth in terms of what they can signal with their you know, whereas the monkeys, they got 5 noises, but they become highly intelligent because of the need to follow the social structures, because of the bonding. The octopuses and the cuttlefish, on the other hand, even though have enormous bandwidth in their communication ability, they could be writing epics for one another, okay? And they're not, because they have no social structure whatsoever, because they lay their eggs, and their eggs float, zillions of eggs float away, and out of those zillions, 1,000 maybe get born and grow up, and they're nowhere near their parents. And and every once in a while, there are places where cuttlefish or octopuses will sort of congregate, but the children of those won't. God knows where they'll be. And so these guys have there's this cap on their intelligence. There's a beautiful book about this. I've got it in my Kindle someplace. But it's really, so my point, where's my point? And I'll shut up in a second. If it were not for this social bonding, if it were not for this social empathy system and this first part of the family soul, we wouldn't have developed all this high intelligence. You follow me? So we've really got it backwards in the sense that we think, you know, our bodies and our emotions are just platforms for big brains. It's pretty much the opposite. I mean, the big brain is, you know, this left brain thing is just really supposed to be a kind of troubleshooter. Okay, so that's the first of 5 kind of characteristics for the family soul. And I want to stop now and ask you for thoughts and responses. But it's a distributed collective intelligence, right? Largely subconscious. It's built into the human species, and it's super active in families, and it's very active in chess clubs. And I mean, it forms quickly. It forms and unforms 3 different times at cocktail parties as different groups, you know, coalesce or come apart. And obviously it's not as deep, and there's not as much the same kind of conscience as Linda was talking about. Conscience has to do with how we're allowed to behave in order to belong, right? Okay, I'll shut up. So that's point number 1. Yes, please.
Oh, well, I just want to really just confirm what you're saying. So my PhD was in primatology, and I studied a troop of baboons in Africa across the savannah, 128 of them. And basically, if you didn't understand their social empathy system, you weren't going to even, you know, begin to understand what was happening. And, you know, that's a massive part of any primatological work, is understanding the unspoken energy dynamics between them all. And, you know, the rules, you just wouldn't even... You can't even start on the rules of who can be closest to whom, and hierarchy, and there's just so much stuff there. And that was a troop of olive baboons, but I also studied gorillas and chimps and bonobos in various different ways. And obviously the higher you get up the apes scale, the more both complex and subtle those all become. You know, I think it in a way it's more obvious when you're looking at the baboons or wolves or something than it is when you get to human beings and apes, because it just becomes deeper but finer in its expression, and and trickier almost sometimes to put your finger on exactly what's happening. But the depth of it, and in all the study of that, you know, I spend a lot of time studying anthropological, traditional ethnographic studies. And of course that's where Bert Hellinger even started, with the Zulus and their whole ancestral respect. And we'll probably all know that story, but I just wanted to pitch in that confirmation from my very personal professional experience.
Thank you. I didn't know you had a PhD, but apparently you do. Good for you. And I want to quibble a little bit. I think that we're just not used to looking at ourselves. It's just as interesting and even more complex with us. We just don't look at it the same.
Oh, I'm not saying it's not, absolutely more complex. I just think it's a bit easier to see, is what I meant, in the baboons, because they're not as conscious of themselves, and so therefore the rules are actually much more obvious.
Yeah.
That's all I meant by more subtle. Like you have to kind of look a little bit more often to find what they are.
Anybody else want to jump in? Linda H.
I think it does get quite subtle because it can happen after an interaction between maybe even just a couple of people, and one of them says, did I actually experience that happening, or did he actually do that to her? And it can be really subtle too. There's that sense of something happened, but what was it? Was it a snub? Was it a whatever? And yes, one person might say it's obvious and another person say no. I could bring up another example out of my conversation with my husband this morning. The woman's family took over looking after her, and he's left saying, well, was I left out or wasn't I? And so these things are really interesting, and that's probably part of the skill of a counselor or a constellator, is sensing what that is that's really happened.
Yes, I totally agree with that. By the way, Izzy mentioned Bert Hellinger on Constellation Talk, starting about 20th of March. There's a beautiful, intense...
20th of March?
Yeah.
So it's started already?
Yes, it's kind of over, but there's like 50 letters.
All right.
And it's about Bert and Sophie and their ways of behaving and their position as the sort of, quote, parents, unquote, of the approach. And there's a letter in there by Stephen Gunter Vine, I believe, which is an awesome parsing of the situation. He really just has done a beautiful, beautiful job of describing what the issues are and intelligent ways to look at it. And I mean, most of you probably know Bert and Sophie are iconized by some and seen as, you know, practically gurus, and others think they're spawn of the devil practically. And so it's a good conversation. It really is. I recommend it.
Can you send us that? Can you put that link on somewhere, or is that link easy to find?
Well, you know what Constellation Talk is? It's a list. It's an email list server. It's existed for. It's Chris Walsh's thing.
That's what I thought.
It's a Yahoo group called Constellation Talk. So you have to join Yahoo, okay, and then join that group, and you'll have access to it. And if you want to get the emails, or you can just
Chris Walsh have to approve that.
He does a fine job of moderating that, Izzy.
Okay.
He's done a beautiful job of that. Izzy and I have both had different kinds of run-ins with Chris Walsh, so, but he does a beautiful, beautiful job of moderating that.
Sure.
But that's worth looking at. All right. You know, I might, Sandy, can you send me the emails for everybody that's here tonight?
Yes.
Or maybe guys put your emails into the chat thing or something, and I will cut and paste Stephen and Gunter Vinay's the letter in, because it is just, he really knocks the ball out of the park in terms of talking about what's going on there and how the best ways to think about it might be.
Thank you, Michael.
And it was all really, somebody put a letter on there saying that there's a video in German or Russian German, I guess, of Bert and Sophie really seeming to brutalize a client on stage. And so the person wrote a letter and said, I just can't deal with this. you know, what this is against anything that any traumatologist would ever say. And then some other people started saying, yes, that's true, but then there are spiritual disciplines where people do hit people, and so it got to be just a great conversation. Okay. Anybody else want to say anything before? I mean, I don't care how far we get tonight, because we can just go on 2 weeks from now.
Michael, I'd be appreciative if you could recap a couple of other points you said, because I know I have followed on from what Izzy said, but I think you were making some other points as well there that I don't recall at this moment.
Well, how do I know?
Or did we really cover it all?
No, I mean, how do I know which ones?
Because we talked about, well, Izzy was talking about subtle communication.
Well, she was talking about trying to create some kind of model of the social relationship rules, the conscience in Linda C's language, the overlap in Marie's language, that exist in the distributed intelligence of these species, these troops of monkeys, right? Each one of those troops has its colony soul. It has its troop soul, right? And there are sort of basic underlying patterns in the way they structure those souls, and each troop is going to work them out differently, just like each family works them out differently in humans. So I think Izzy was talking about trying to, as a student, as a researcher, trying to get an intellectual understanding of what the underlying patterns were and how they were manifesting in this particular troop. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, but and also just basically confirming the obviousness to me of that, the truth of what you were saying really was just there, totally active, a daily part of my life at that time, watching. That's what I was watching. I've actually only just recently kind of twigged that I was kind of doing constellations in the middle of Africa with a troop of baboons. Something, and I was telling
Linda
recently. So yeah.
Linda H, is that helping or?
Yes, I think it is. I just had a sense that I might have missed some of your greater point, but now I've got it. And that was my thought, Izzy, that you had already begun your interest in constellations way back then.
Yeah. All right. So if this is if this family soul is a guiding social intelligence that's distributed among built-in largely subconscious behaviors of the members. No, I think those are good words. I really do.
Yeah.
Oh, Michael, I do have something I wanted to add to that.
Okay.
The idea of having a mission, of like a family mission statement that Stephen Covey talks about quite a lot, or some others, that over the family, that a human family can create something that is. Does a mission statement arise from the soul or from a higher intelligence? Or it's interesting to think how a mission statement guides that otherwise what do you call it, the amorphous organism.
So I'm really, really super happy because you just asked the question that leads to my next point. So I love it when that happens. Yeah, so if there is this thing that I just described, this intelligence, distributed, largely unconscious, what's its mission? And I want to say, and I think there's a lot of truth in saying it, its mission is to propagate life with love onward through the generations. That's its global mission statement. And I mean not just life, but life with love. So I invented this word, life with love. Now,
I love it.
why do I say life with love? Well, we've found out, in the last 30 years, 40 years, a couple of things. Number one, emotions are not hostile to rationality. In fact, rationality doesn't work well in a practical sense without emotions. So there's these examples of people with certain kinds of lesions in their brains, or this famous guy, Phineas Gage, who had a wound. He had a spike driven up through here, and it took out some of his forebrain, and the guy actually lived, and he was perfectly intelligent. He could sit down and talk in a rational way about anything. You could ask him to tell, he would pose an ethical problem for him, and he could sit there and say, well, what you should do. And his life went to shit. He could not make good choices. He had no emotional tagging on his perceptions of life. When we perceive stuff, before our conscious brain gets a hold of it, it's already tagged with feelings. This is good for me, this is bad for me, this is interesting to me, that's nervous making. And if those little pre-judgments, if those what we call emotional judgments, if they're not there, your brain can't make good decisions about things. It can make them in the abstract, but when it's faced with real life situations, it does the wrong stuff. So we know now that, the idea that emotions and reason are at odds with one another. Yes, they can conflict at times, but the idea that rationality is king and emotions are some sort of feminine shit that you should try to not have anything to do with, which was the case when I grew up. All right? That's wrong. That's gone. Daniel Goleman wrote his books on emotional intelligence. Antonio Damasio wrote his books on neurology. And and then this guy Harlow in the 50s took monkeys, put them in cages without their moms, gave them food, comfort, things to play with, and they got sick and died. Because they had no love and they had no social interactions. Hence my term, life with love. The purpose, the mission, the major, largest scale mission of this guiding social intelligence is to propagate life with love down through the generations. Keep the species alive and healthy. And love is part of that. And if you look at what goes on in constellations and in human behavior, love often trumps life. You can't really understand what goes on in family systems without understanding that sometimes love is more important than life. Stefan Hausner's book is, Even If It Costs Me My Life, which is not a title that will sell in the United States, let me tell you. Because when I went to his workshop, I bought 6 of them to try to sell in my own workshops, and no one really wanted to buy them because we don't like to think that way. So, Linda, yes, a family can consciously think up a mission statement, and that's conscious, that's fine, that's cool. But subconsciously, this continuous consciousness that's come down through the generations, it is there. I mean, we haven't talked about the cross-generational part of this yet, but it's there. Its mission is to propagate life with love onward through the generations. Thoughts about that? Linda, you there?
Muted. Yes, I am.
Thoughts?
Well, the love. Oh, yeah, okay. I'm going to say yes. And when it's dysfunctional, we continue what's not love because we've lost the way. I could understand it that way.
I don't mean that it's always successful. I mean that's its mission. Its job is to promote that.
Okay.
This is not an easy thing. When people talk about the orders of the 3 or 4 orders of love, I get very upset. Orders is a very bad word in English because love doesn't order us around. It's really general patterns of success. And the thing is, this is way more complicated than the stock market, and there's no rules for how to make that always come out right. This is a tough job. This is a very complex social intelligence that is always trying somehow to bring things right. And that is to say, to get offspring that that live and grow up with enough love to be okay. And we're in very bad shape as a species about that. We devastate families. We have, this stuff politicians talking about family values is just nonsense. We don't give families, at least not in the U.S. I don't know about some of the other countries that we're looking at here or speaking of it. But we could save billions and billions of dollars if the first 2 years of children's life was done right.
Yeah.
Or even just done better. Let's not say right, just done better.
And I think as well, it's worth saying that I correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but when you say life with love, you're not saying that it's going to look pretty, because the love is like, that these rules are anarchic as well in their way, that the love and the loyalty is, it cannot look pretty. It doesn't mean it has to look pretty. It just means there's this, I don't know another word to use. It's like
let me take a stab at what you're driving at. For love to prevail is not always easy. It doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't fights or struggles. It means that in the end, there's some kind of compromise, some kind of meeting, some kind of, the kind of stuff that we don't see happening in the American government anymore, for example. That there's some sort of cooperation. Well, actually, hold on. I mean, we could go on to the next point here. We'll go one more tonight. Okay, so.
Can I make a comment? Perhaps if we distinguish. Perhaps if we distinguish between. Great. Love and loyalty. We can't necessarily say that love and loyalty are meaning the same thing. Loyalty can have different consequences. We can be loyal to love and we can be loyal to people, but not necessarily love and loyalty as synonymous.
Yeah.
And that might be part of the difference.
I didn't really ever use the word loyalty.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then, see, you're just leading us to the next one here. The third characteristic is, so if the mission is to propagate life with love down through the generations, then the primary strategy is summed up in 2 words: harmonious inclusion. Not just inclusion, harmonious inclusion, and not just harmony, but also inclusion. And those 2 things are most often or very often at odds with one another. And that is the crux of the matter. I mean, we'll come back here next week and do a whole thing on harmony and exclusion, probably 2 weeks from tonight, because that gets very deep and interesting.
Mm.
Now, you'll notice, some of you, that this is not the standard doctrine that you hear in most constellation community conversations or whatever, the thing there is inclusion. You know, kind of almost radical inclusion. Everybody has to belong. Okay? The nutshell that I want to put out to you is there's just this trade-off between inclusion means larger size, means more belong, more can belong. Okay? But the more that belong, the harder it often becomes to achieve harmony. Because there's more points of view, there's more different people who could fill the same role, who might compete for it, et cetera, and so on and so forth. In the family, as we are given it, or were given it before artificial insemination, and I won't say before LGBT stuff, because LGBT stuff was included in families in Aboriginal societies in many cases without a problem. Transvestite males were often great caregivers and healers, and it's not, and cross-gendered females were often fierce warriors and all kinds of things like this. They didn't have the kind of problems with it that the Christians brought over here, or that some of the other Judeo-Christian religions have. I got lost there. Where the hell was I going? I got lost.
We were just talking about harmony and.
Well, okay, so let me back up. What I want to say to you, and I'll go into more in depth next week, I think, is 2 weeks from now, is that there's the family soul, in pursuit of its mission of propagating life and love. See, I really got all this nailed down. Maybe it's not typical constellation sort of talk. This is cognitive scientist sort of talk. In pursuit of this mission, it will try to optimize harmony and inclusion. And that means sometimes the more inclusion we've got, the less harmony we get. Harmony goes down, inclusion goes up. But sometimes if harmony goes up, then a lot of people have to be excluded in order for that harmony to get higher. So you see there's this natural trade-off between these two. You know, why don't human societies just get bigger and bigger? Why don't, you know, there apparently is this kind of social study that says that about 150 people is the size of a tribe or a clan. That's about how many social relations we're designed to deal with in close quarters. That's, 15 families or something like that. And believe me, we haven't changed our design. We are at this point evolving way the hell faster than our biology is built to handle. It is totally not built to handle tweeting. Facebook is out, Facebook has a huge problem now. And Facebook doesn't know whether it can face up to it. And the problem is that it's creating filter bubbles around people. It feeds them what the algorithm thinks they want to hear. So now thousands or tens of thousands of people are paid to inject fake news onto Facebook. And the algorithms feed this fake news to people. And Zuckerberg and his brain trust are only now just starting to realize, boy, we might have to do something about this, and we don't really know what to do. Am I making sense with what I'm saying? And Eli Parser wrote The Filter Bubble in 2008. There were books about this in 2001, 2008, and another one, and Facebook just ignored it. But see, what happened is people can't filter all the information themselves. It's way too much. So based on the choices, the things that you like and the things that you look at and the amount of time that you spend on one page or whatever, because all this stuff is being monitored, a profile is built of you, and you are then shown what that algorithm thinks you want to see. The problem with that is you only see what you like. You don't hear opposing point of views anymore. And you don't believe the same truth anymore, especially when people take fabricated stories and express them as if they were facts and pump them into this massive system with 2 billion people in it. And that has a lot to do with what happened in the US election. And there's an article, there's a long article in the Sunday New York Times this last Sunday about how Facebook is only just now starting to realize they've got a major issue on their hands. They can pretty much take down democracy, or maybe they already are taking down democracy. And what are they going to do about it, if anything?
Also, Michael, videos can be made to look so convincing.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful one of elephants on trampolines, and you couldn't imagine that it was fake. So even what we think we see, we have to ask, did it really happen? Did I really see that? It makes it, it's just almost contorts our, frontal cortex or something. Really.
That's a very good point, Linda.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So anyway, mission, propagation of life with love down through the generation, and its main strategy is to include as much as possible and have as much harmony as possible. And we have to realize that those two cut against one another. Now, in general, I don't think the constellation community has really taken that to heart. In 2015, I ran these US and Canadian constellation conversations. We had 11 of them every week. There were like 40 or 50 major people signed up, and about 19 or 20 came on most. And there's still a page with all these videos on them and summaries of the conversations. And you could hear people talking about radical inclusion. Everything must be included. I don't believe that's true. It's a nice fantasy, but we have to deal with the fact that if that inclusion destroys harmony, then we don't have a family anymore because of that. All right? Even in the beginning, Bert, even in the beginning they were talking about, well, if somebody murders another family member, are they still supposed to be included or not, or whatever? I mean, this is a real question. My point is, I'm going all mathematical and cognitive scientist on you guys again and saying we have to optimize those two things. That means we have to find the point at which, the sum of them is the highest. Little bit more harmony, and we start to lose too many people. Little bit more inclusion, and we start to lose too much. Again, I'll say more about this next week. In addition to the questions next week of next 2 weeks of, yeah, well, fine, if everybody's supposed to belong, how do we know who the hell's a member? That's not an easy question. Okay? That is not an easy question. When I first...
I guess...
Huh? Somebody said something.
That's right, go
on. When I first was with Mark Wolin, first training, I was really puzzling over okay, so everybody's supposed to belong, but who's a member? How do you get to be a member? Because you cannot, some people say, oh, if anybody that you've slept with in your whole, anybody that you've had sex with in your whole life is a member. Nah, not in some societies. It's much trickier than that. And we've got the situation where there's a lot of dead veterans in my family system. There's a lot of people lost in the Battle of Okinawa that had deeply affected my life because I inherited my dad's survivor guilt. You follow me? Those really are big players in my family system. And they don't have any blood relation at all to me. You understand? So we need some very, rich and or subtle way of starting to understand who even belongs. Now, you can also see that this is me and my standard tendency to try to get beneath and behind the platitudes and see what's there.
Well, I think you have to, Michael. The image I have at the moment is a telephone box, and you can have a game and you can think, how many people can I fit in the telephone box? And at a certain point, unless they're make sure they keep totally in their place, very much in, you can't fit everybody in, but there's no freedom. And it's finding how many people can fit in the telephone box so that somebody can make the call and everybody can be part of it. It seems more like that's what you're talking about. So radical inclusiveness is really the maximum number of people who can be part of that telephone call rather than how many you can fit in the box.
That's a great analogy. I said a
good
minute
analogy
that Chris Walsh has done a really good job with Constellation Talk. Several years ago, people brought up some subjects that didn't seem to have anything to do with constellations. So Chris wrote a polite letter and said, those don't fit the guidelines. We're here to talk about certain things, and those don't seem to be those kind of things. Then there was not a flood, but there were a bunch of letters. Well, wait a minute. We have to include. We can't exclude anyone. All right? And so here's this simplified, oversimplified thing of radical inclusion. Everybody can belong. Everybody belong turns into covert exclusions. The idea that everybody can belong, we don't have to differentiate at all. What happens is there's all sorts of covert social exclusions going on, and we're not talking about them.
Yeah.
And harmony goes down the tubes.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think there's some, my experience in 2015 with these constellation conversations was we were most of the way through about 8 of those conversations before people really started feeling safe telling one another how they thought and how they did things. Because facilitators we don't see each other working that much. We were all trained by different people. Mm-hmm. We all use these words, constellations and this, that, and the other thing. But a lot of times I think we're afraid that, if we actually articulated what we thought about it, that wouldn't be at all what somebody else thought about it, and then we wouldn't belong anymore. Okay. and again, my dance is, no, we got to talk about it. The energy psychology community, the ACE, Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, which I think is a wonderful group that's coming on to its 20th anniversary now and has got APA recognition in the United States, finally, and things like this. They hash things out. They've hashed things out to the point where they have something they call comprehensive energy psychology that they can teach, that enough of them have agreed on as a sort of central core. Everybody's different. It's tremendous. There's everything from shamanic attachment stuff to verbal this, to me, to all kinds of things going on there. Tapping, EMDR, TAT, TFT. There's all these initials. But the point is they're a wonderful community. But it's because they talk about it. Because they're conscious about who they are, what they're trying to be. I mean, obviously, they're also a professional society with paid director, and so we're not there yet. But to me, they're a model of what I would love to see happen with constellations. You comprehensive, because constellations are just going in all kinds of directions now. It's very clear, in the United States at least. All right. So that's 3 of my points. Distributed social intelligence, subconscious, propagation of life with love down through the generations. And the major strategy is to include as much as possible insofar as it doesn't destroy harmony, and to harmonize as much as possible insofar as it doesn't do too much excluding. And this is a fluid thing. It's very fluid. You know, somebody's going to be left out more or less at different times and back in at other times, and no, right? But this fits the classic kinds of things that we see cause the damage, the ancestral traumatic damage. We've got some aunt who, 3 generations ago, who had a psychological problem or a Kundalini experience or something and was sent off to some nut house and then never spoken about again. You know, she was consigned to what was essentially a prison for insane people, and people pretended that that person didn't exist. Okay, well, that person definitely is a member. I don't think we have to question that. And that omission from the family story, from the family consciousness, that's the family soul is not going to put up with that. Which means that that's going to show up somehow. There's going to be somebody being loyal to that and trying to resurface that person 2-3 generations later. Or the great love that mom had before she met dad, and the tragic way that he left her, that she'd never got over, you know, and now one of her children is somehow, you know, loyal to her pain or loyal to him or something, right? We got 2 more bullet points on this 5 characteristic scale here. I'll mention them. I don't know if we have time to talk about them too much, but we'll pick up here next time. 2 of them are very interesting. One is, faced with difficult challenges, the family soul will at times choose the good of the group over that of the individual member. That is a very interesting subject.
Could probably say the perceived good of the family or something like that, because the good is the operative word there, isn't it?
It is, and it's as perceived by that subconscious collective intelligence. It's as perceived by something that's deeper than we may also think. This is tricky. We may also think consciously about it, but it's going on whether we think consciously about it or not.
This is part of the survival, isn't it? Because our basic drive is to survival one way or the other. And that tends not to include morality unless we're really saintly. So,
according to Bert, you know, it creates morality.
Well, then why are we having all these constellations? Because surely they're...
I mean, he spoke of this soul in the terms that sort of more like Linda was using, that what I'm calling a collective social intelligence is a conscience, is a thing that tells you when you are doing stuff that will allow you to belong and when you are doing stuff that will tend to make you not belong. He basically
Michael, what's that fantastic phrase about something among somebody who won't steal among thieves is the outcast? Was a phrase, something among thieves.
Honor among thieves? No.
Honor among, yeah, maybe the honor among thieves. Like, so if you have a whether it's a gang, I think it came out of like Oliver Twist days, you know, that if your family is thieving, you can't not do that. So the morality in that particular group is to steal or whatever. In the case
whatever,
of squadrons of
the position here is whatever you have to do to belong is what's right.
Yeah.
When you think about that in terms of the national soul, you know, murder in the defense of your country is perfectly okay. Oh,
yeah, and
awesome. You're a hero.
And how such atrocities happen in war with groups of soldiers who, you know, one person starts one thing, and then to belong in that squadron means raping and pillaging, then that's what happens.
So it doesn't, Linda H., it doesn't exclude morality, it creates morality.
Just not the type of morality that you might be thinking.
True. I'm thinking in terms of thievery, they often feel they're being a benefit. So, there are ways to look at it. I don't
understand. They think they're being a benefit. What is that?
Oh, a Robin Hood type situation.
Well, maybe they are.
Or they're to me, that's survival.
Sure.
They know they need to do that to survive. And yes, we can't say that that's not moral in order to wish to stay in a body on this earth.
I think what you're saying makes sense. It's not as close to the topic as the other stuff that's being said. I mean, I'm coming back to this idea of inclusion. Yes.
But inclusion can either be, well, let's see how many we can get in, but it's not necessarily embracing. And so how do we include and embrace? Because in the embrace, you feel there is love, there is the heart opening. And that's different to a group mentality where it's survival.
I think are you using the word embrace like Michael uses the word harmony?
Yeah, I don't know.
Along those lines, it's the love, it's the life with love.
I mean, I think what you're saying, it makes sense to me. I have trouble relating it to the other things that are being
said. What you've just said. I'm probably simply picking up on what really is conscience and what really is morality. But otherwise, actually, I'm quite happy with everything that's been said.
Maybe there's the interpretation of the word conscience, which has two interpretations.
Yeah.
What are they? What are they?
Well, I believe that conscience, in the way that Linda Camus first spoke of it, was more like a collective consciousness, whereas conscience, in the way that Linda H. is using it, is more in relation to morality and one's conscience.
Do you agree, Linda C.?
Yes. Yes, and I would add further that in the collective conscious, I'm not sure I'm going to articulate this well, there is a component of loyalty. So, for example, going back to the war crimes or something like that, or a perpetrator of some sort, criminal activity. The conscience of that family has you perform so that you are safe in that family. You're within your tribe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the loyalty is part of it.
Yeah. I mean, again, though, what's wrong with saying what's right is what allows you to belong?
And recognizing that it's not necessarily morally right.
Yes.
Well, I think Hellinger...
Except in that family.
I think Bert basically was saying that that's the genesis of morality. Whatever is required of human beings to belong to a family or a tribe, that's where morality comes from in the first place.
I think Michael's right. I'm just thinking of an example from my ethnography days, where in tribes of, for instance, in the Somali desert tribes, now they had one big room where the family lived, slept, everything. Now the parents made love in that room. The children were there, didn't matter how old they were. They heard their parents having sex. If you took a classic American middle-class family and said that you had children in the room and you were having sex in front of them, well, you would probably be had up in court for some kind of sexual whatever. And so the morality of that is very different from that. It's contextual to what the society rules are, and there is no one fixed right or wrong way of doing it. It's just what that society is.
I mean,
rules evolve.
Linda H, you've sort of taken us into sort of deep questions of ethics here, which is fine. Aristotle claimed that the good, that which is ethical, that which is desirable, is whatever brings the greatest amount of good to the greatest amount of people. And that's a very broad and flexible notion. And it isn't very simply rule-bound either. Sometimes, you know, there are policemen who there are honest policemen. I mean, I read books, I read a lot of different kinds of fiction, and there's a lot of cop fiction. And there are honest, well-meaning policemen who have watched so many killers get messed up and freed by the court system that they tend to just decide, this guy is pure evil. I'm going to have an accident and shoot him. Do you understand me? Now, I judge, you know, I tend to look at that in terms of the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. And of course, for someone to take it upon themselves to act in that way is a big karmic responsibility, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong.
Good analogy.
I think that we've lost, gets very rich stuff. We've lost our notion of what a warrior is needed for. Because a warrior, in some sense, is a person who can deal in violence and death, if necessary, for the good of groups, families, tribes, the planet, but doesn't really want to deal that necessarily that way. Do you understand me? The martial arts, at least those that I experienced, I don't know about karate, but judo and aikido, and you train that, you know that the biggest enemy is yourself. You are trying to master yourself, and you are learning tools that you really don't particularly want to use, and you have great fun learning them, you know, and you can achieve enlightenment and deep wisdom learning them, frankly. But they're there, and you understand them, and sometimes then it's just like you have a choice to make. So this just goes back to what Linda H. got us into, which is rich and interesting questions about ethics. It's not simple. But I still think it's fair to say that Bert's original ideas, and I think there's truth in them, is that the genesis of ethics is whatever the hell belongs. Whatever the hell belongs in your tribe is what's right. So if cannibalism is what's right in your tribe, ritual cannibalism in order to ingest the spirit of your enemies or whatever, if that's right in your tribe. Now, we may not like it in our tribe. We may look at it from some larger point of view and say that's perhaps a destructive way to live. You know what I mean? We can say that's not very good for the propagation of life with love and harmony and inclusion in the long run. And we might be right about that. Do you follow me? But that's kind of an abstraction when we're faced with tribes that are living and trying to do the propagation of life with love via harmony and inclusion. There's a book, Under the Mountain Wall, by Peter Matheson that just changed my whole notion. This is about warring tribes in Indonesia. It was basically a sport for them. They would decide to have a war one day, and people got killed every once in a while, and there were feuds, and If it rained on the day they were going to have a war, they wouldn't hold it. Stuff like this. But basically, these two tribes were traditional enemies, and they basically kept each other alive. They kept each other strong. They had reason to, you know what I mean? There was this larger harmony in their. Look at the NFL. Right? No, there's this larger harmony of rule-based behavior in which these conflicts take place, right? This gets very interesting, because what's going on in modern warfare is that we keep breaking the rules of larger harmony. We keep using technology to cheat. Now we don't have to send people anymore. We can send robots. Or when native warriors with little one-shot rifles were faced with a Gatling gun, which could mow down 100 of them in 5 minutes. That's not going to create warriors in the good sense. Among the Plains tribes, a lot of them, you got more honor from counting coup on your enemy than you did from killing him. And to count
coup, what's that mean?
It meant getting close enough to bang him on the head and running away and living. Or stealing his horse. Okay? Having that other one lose face. That was better than having killed him. So that's a sport. I don't think conflict is going to go away. Conflict is built into nature. There's conflict between the cougar and the deer. But it's in a larger ecological umbrella of harmony in which two species keep each other beautiful. Neither one gets fat and lazy.
Unfortunately, in humans, they are our tribe.
Yeah. All right, so we've done our 90 minutes. We'll pick up next time with Family Soul. Will choose the good of the group over that of an individual member, and Family Soul is capable of a kind of cross-generational load balancing. Now, you've never heard it that way unless you've heard me before. Because that's what it's doing. It's balancing the load. If it's too much for one generation, it'll show up 2 generations later in the hopes that it can be processed then. But there's trauma in the family soul, and it needs to be processed for that family soul to be healthy. I think this is tremendously important stuff. We do not understand it well enough. We don't act on it. Organizations, governments, businesses are traumatizing families. They are creating traumatized children that are growing up and creating more traumatized organizations and governments. And it is a cycle that is bloody and messy. And I don't see us getting better until we come to terms with it. And it comes right back to this collective thing. Okay,
That's
folks.
cool, Michael. Thank you. And thank you,
Michael.
Hey, listen, I want to thank you. This was a small but very lovely and high-class conversation.
Thanks, Linda H., for throwing a spanner in the works.
Thank you.
Oh, I love these. I'm so glad we've got these. I feel like life's real because we get together every fortnight.
Well, they'll go on a couple more times, and then they'll stop when I start teaching
Core concepts.
Again.
Could you just clarify for me, Michael, with our time zones? So when you say it's the 20th, so that's your Tuesday night?
No, it's my Wednesday night.
Okay, so it'll be this same time
Yes,
for
it's
us.
exactly the same time as this, only it's every week.
You said it was the 20th of June.
Yes. Yeah, I can't start it as early because I got another conference to
No,
go.
I know, but isn't the 20th of June a Tuesday?
Yes.
Well then.
Goodbye, everybody.
Wait a minute. It is Tuesdays. Shit. Sorry.
Bye, Linda. Yeah, the next round of classes are Tuesdays, since we
Yeah.
did Wednesdays last year.
Okay, thank you. Just checking.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's
And
fine.
we-
Just need to put it in.
And it's weekly, Michael?
Yeah, it's weekly, 9 weeks. Also, if you know people that would be interested in this kind of a conversation, bring them around, because we just don't want to deluge people with newsletters.
Mm-hmm. You could post it on the ISCA website or Facebook group too.
Yeah, we've kind of put it there, but there's so much stuff there. You know what I mean? Everybody is posting their stuff there.
Yes, but everybody wants to learn. I mentioned it today when there was an ISCA meeting, so.
Thank you.
It's good, because then like Linda C can comment on that, and like when sorry, that's my phone going off, but that,
Right.
you know, like when you put it on the main family systemic thing, I can comment on it. And
Izzy, let's talk sometime before too long, okay?
yeah.
All right, good night. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Sandy.